All right, everyone, ready for evolution? I'm your brother and friend, Brother Eric Trey Muhammad. Excited to continue with this series of I'm Rich, Notes from the Wealth Minister with Wallace D. Wattles. This is the third installment, the third chapter of his book, The Science of Getting Rich. And I share it out of a collection. This collection that I have is entitled The Science of Success, three classics. I don't know if you can see that, but there are three classics to tied to this material. It's the science of getting rich, it's the science of being well, and the science of being great. All those things are a part of where we are because it's all inside of us. However, I want to continue this series and shout out to the one who inspired it for me, Mr. Sekou Wright. You can go to his page, Sekou, Sekou, Wrights, WRITES.com. And what I'm going to share with you today, the third installment of the third chapter, which is very brief, it's chapter 3, is opportunity monopolized. Okay. Now, I remember reading this some time ago, and if you think about it, folks, when I read these sessions, I read them live in the moment. It's my first time returning to that particular chapter in I don't know how long, but whatever it inspires in me, that's the thought that I leave for us for the day. All right, so here we go. Chapter 3, The Science of Getting Rich is Opportunity Monopolized. No man is kept poor before because opportunity has been taken away from him, because other people have monopolized the wealth and have put a fence around it. You may be shut off from engaging in business in certain lines, but there are other channels open to you. Probably it would be hard for you to get control of any of the great railroad systems. That field is pretty well monopolized. But the electric railway business is still in its infancy and offers plenty of scope for enterprise. And it will be but a few years until traffic and transportation through the air will become a great industry. And in all its branches will give employment to hundreds of thousands and perhaps to millions of people. Why not turn your attention to the development of aerial transportation instead of competing with J.J. Hill and others like chance in the steam railway world? It is quite true that if you are a workman in the employ of the Steel Trust, you have very little chance of becoming the owner of the plant in which you work. But it is also true that if you will commence to act in a certain way, you can soon leave the employ of the Steel Trust. You can buy a farm or a farm of from 10 to 40 acres and engage in business as a producer of foodstuffs. There is great opportunity at this time for men who will live upon small tracts of land and cultivate that same intensively. Such men will certainly get rich. You may say that it is impossible for you to get the land, but I am going to prove to you that it is not impossible and that you can certainly get a farm if you will go to work in a certain way. At different periods, the tide of opportunity sets in different directions according to the needs of the whole and the particular stage of social evolution which has been reached. At present, in America, it is setting toward agriculture and the allied industries and professions. Today, opportunity is open before the factory worker is in line, factory worker in his line. It is open before the businessman who supplies the farmer more than before the one who supplied the factory worker, and before the professional man who waits upon the farmer more than before the one who serves the working class. There is abundance of opportunity for the man who will go with the tide instead of trying to swim against it. So the factory workers, either as individuals or as a class, are not deprived of opportunity. The workers are not being kept down by their masters. They are not being ground by the trusts and combinations of capital. As a class, they are where they are because they do not do things in a certain way. If the workers of America chose to do so, they could follow the example of their brothers in Belgium and other countries and establish great department stores and cooperative industries. They could elect men of their own class to office and pass laws favoring the development of such cooperative industries. And in a few years, they could take peaceable possession of the industrial field. The working class may become the master class whenever they will begin to do things in a certain way. The law of wealth is the same for them as it is for all others. This they must learn, and they will remain where they are as long as they continue to do as they do. The individual worker, however, is not held down by the ignorance of the mental slothfulness of his class. He can follow the tide of opportunity to riches, and this book will tell him how. No one is kept in poverty by a shortness in the supply of riches. There is more than enough for all. A palace is large as the Capitol at Washington. A palace as large as the Capitol at Washington may be built for every family on earth from the building material in the United States alone. And under intensive cultivation, this country would produce wool, cotton, linen, and silk enough to clothe each person in the world finer than Solomon was arrayed in all his glory, together with food enough to feed them all luxuriously. The visible supply is practically inexhaustible, and the invisible supply really is inexhaustible. Everything you see on earth is made from one original substance out of which all things proceed. New forms are constantly being made and older ones are dissolving, but all are shapes assumed by one thing. There is no limit to the supply of formless stuff or original substance. The universe is made out of it, but it was not all used in making the universe. The space in, though, the space in rather, through and between the forms of the visible universe are permeated and filled rather with the original substance and the formless stuff, with the raw material of all things. 10,000 times as much has been made, might still be made, and even then we should not have exhausted the supply of universal raw material. No man, therefore, is poor because nature is poor or because there is not enough to go around. Nature is an inexhaustible storehouse of riches. The supply will never run short. Original substance is alive and creative energy is alive rather with creative energy and is constantly producing more forms. When the supply of building material is exhausted, more will be produced. When the soil is exhausted so that foodstuff and materials are for clothing will no longer grow upon it, it will be renewed or more soil will be made. When all the gold and silver has been dug from the earth, if man is still in such a stage of social development that he needs gold and silver, more will produce, more will produced from the formless. The formless stuff responds to the needs of man, and it will not let him be without any good thing. This is true of man collectively. The race as a whole is always abundantly rich, and if individuals are poor, it is because they do not follow the certain way of doing things, which makes the individual man rich. The formless stuff is intelligent. It is stuff which thinks, it is alive, and it is always compelled toward more life. It is the natural and inherent impulse of life to seek to live more. It is the nature of intelligence to enlarge itself and of consciousness to seek to extend its boundaries and find fuller expression. The universe of forms has been made by formless living substance, throwing itself into form in order to express itself more fully. The universe is a great living presence, always moving inherently toward more life and fuller functioning. Nature is formed for the advancement of life. Its impelling motive is the increase of life. For this cause, everything which can possibly minister to life is bountifully provided. There can be no lack unless God is to contradict himself and nullify his own works. You are not kept poor by lack of the supply of riches. It is a fact, which I shall demonstrate a little farther, on that even the resources of the former supply are at the command of the man or woman, the command of the man or woman will act and think in a certain way. That concludes chapter 3 of the science of getting rich. Now, folks, there's a lot to unpack there in those few short pages. One thing I was very clear on is when I look back to the beginning of that chapter, chapter 3, is opportunity monopolized. He said, no man is kept poor because opportunity has been taken away from him because other people have monopolized the wealth and have put a fence around it. Folks, the abundance on the planet is infinite, endless, you know, and God operates in a certain way. This is my takeaway now. God operates in a certain way that if one avenue closes, another road will open. How many of you ever heard the statement, when uh, a door is closed, a window opens? There will always be options to access the abundance, but here's the key. It's understanding that the abundance that we're looking for has to correlate and correspond with the time in which we live. All right. And he made a lot of great examples when you look at how ages have transformed, right? You look at the transformation of ages, the industrial age, the information age, and the like. When you see all these things happening, that's making way for the emergence or the acceptance or the adoption of a new way of living, a new way of doing, producing, a new way of functioning. And it's inherent with life. Life will always progress. Nature is designed to seek the best option in the best of times. And sometimes a cleansing takes place to remove the old to establish the new. These things are just running through my head right now. So imagine you might be in an industry where you think it's saturated. It may not be saturated. And maybe things attached to that industry that you can do that others may not have thought of. You know, you he gave the history of the railroad, the steam engines, right? But he also talked about how footsteps could be created to assist that production, right? There are things that we can do. We have a gentleman in our history, when I say our history, I'm talking about Black history, and who Hamp Williams, who owned all the property in Texas, that Enron and all these other entities and stations were on. They robbed them of it. They are pirates, and there's still some legal proceedings going on today for the descendants. But what Hamp Williams, I cite him because of his story and the example. They allowed him to claim swampland. They didn't want it. It wasn't developed. And when I say they, I'm talking about white people. And uh, they didn't have slaves any longer. So what did Hamp do? Well, they didn't have the power of slaves because of the war. But what Hamp did was he took that swampland and he looked at all the homes and things that were established around Texas, and he realized they needed to protect their rules. So he used all the timber on his land that he could uh, acquire, and he got wealthy off of shingles. He created shingles for the rooftops. And this is what he did. He found that one niche in an industry in that town that might have been a little saturated or ignored, and he worked with what he had within his space, and he produced these tiles that made him extremely wealthy. All right, so that was the point. How do we look at things? Is how we look at things is important. And this is why I'm so fascinated with revisiting Wallace again when he speaks to operating in a certain way. I encourage you to get this book, The Science of Getting Rich. I'm encouraging you to get the classics. When you get The Science of Success, it includes all three books. Okay, The Science of Getting Rich, The Science of Being Well, and The Science of Being Great. Folks, these are all fundamentals. And the last thing I'll share here is about principles. Okay, how I see principles. Principles are those things that transcend time. If it was a principle in 1840, it's a principle in 1940, it's a principle in 2040. Why? Because principles are rooted fundamentally in God, in nature, in the existence. And as a result, they all transcend time. So you'll always find use for the principles in any given space, which means when you operate, when we operate in a certain way, we can be flat out rich, we can be flat out well, we can be flat out great. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll see you all on the next live stream. Whoa.